They take our property away, just like Thomas Jefferson said they would. Those sons of bitches! It's the greatest theft in human history.
We're back. It's InfoWars Nightly News, another extended transmission because we're desperate to warn you. We know this information, and my God, how could we not try to warn you? Hopefully you'll take that same spirit of enlightenment and spread it on to others, because night is falling fast on free societies worldwide. We've got to defeat this tyranny before it's too late. Before we go to Peter Dale Scott, I got a few more stories here. Maryland Motor Vehicles system has come out with a trial in-car system that bosses you around when you go over the speed limit, and later will report you to police. And they're just beta testing a system that I've seen the federal government transportation department talk about, where they're going to have these systems in your cars that track everything you do. They already admit OnStar sells all your data to the feds and insurance companies. They've actually told their minions that that's happening. Here's a letter we were sent where one of our listeners has basically begun to opt into being part of the system. And that's all up at Infowars.com. And finally, before we go to Peter Dale Scott, Ahmadinejad, who's an engineer, the leader of Iran, spoke at the UN yesterday, and he said that as an engineer, there's no way the towers fell from jet fuel. Well, what about Building 7? It wasn't even hit by an aircraft. And, of course, the media now seizes on this and says, well, if you don't believe the official story, you're with the evil, Iranians. I don't know. I'm with physics. I'm with common sense. And I also know that the BBC reported Building 7 had fallen before it fell with the official story. And I have video of police saying, get back, the government's going to blow up Building 7. So the media likes to focus on the two towers, which are clearly controlled demolitions as well. But Building 7, which was hundreds and hundreds of yards away, wasn't hit by an aircraft. So here's a clip of Ahmadinejad.
I'm an engineer by trade, and I understand that those mega towers could not have imploded the way they did by two jetliners flying into them. The first time I looked at those horrific pictures, I understood. This is a systematic collapse of those towers. This I can say with certainty because there must have been some explosive material that was set off in sequence.
When the need to form a fact-finding team to undertake a thorough investigation concerning the hidden elements involved in September 11th incident was brought up, an idea which is also endorsed by all independent governments and nations, as well as by the majority in the United States. My country and myself came under pressures and threats by the government of the United States.
Yeah, but again, we're not supposed to look at this because supposedly our enemy, the media, told us Ahmadinejad says that looks suspicious. And of course, we've got even other clips of it where you can see the bomb blast going off. We're supposed to just completely buy into the official story. Of course, the owner says he blew it up in a controlled demolition. Oh, there's some video of it right before it. Oh, look, blast points. Oh, and the exact points where a controlled demolition charges will be placed. There's now 1,500 plus architects and engineers, some of them huge skyscraper builders, famous architects going public here in the United States, but just ignore them because Ahmadinejad said it was suspicious. Again, don't let your lying eyes get in the way. Believe the federal government. Hell, you just heard me earlier talk about federal studies through the Journal of Pediatrics that said that mercury was good for kids' brains. Ignore that electron microscope showing it being the most deadly heavy metal in brain neurons. Just ignore the video of Building 7. Ignore that, because I bet if Ahmadinejad looked at that electron microscope, he'd say mercury was bad for those neurons. Well, that's it. I bet Ahmadinejad thinks mercury's bad for babies. He's an extremist. Okay, we're going to go to Peter Dale Scott. I want to conclude this special transmission with an interview with Peter Dale Scott, an amazing historian, professor, researcher, the author of scores of books. He really wrote the original definitive works exposing CIA drug trafficking, of course, in Vietnam and then in Latin America. He's an expert on Iran, Contra, and more. And he's got 2 new books out. American War Machine is his newest, and then, of course, The Road to 9/11. But I wanted to get him on today because recently we have seen a group of filmmakers who were able to interview Richard Clarke and others being threatened by the CIA if they release the names of CIA agents they discovered were basically involved in covering up the identity of the hijackers pre-9/11. This is pretty powerful stuff, and joining us is Peter Dale Scott to discuss it. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be on the show again. You know, it's a matter of 2 names who are not big names in the whole story. The big names in the story, Richard Blee and Tom Wilshire, we've known for some time now, and particularly the name of Richard Blee was discovered in a book by, this is a very important book here, Kevin Fenton. He's a Briton living in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and he's written a whole book about how the CIA withheld information from the FBI. The 2 names that were sensitive to the CIA are part of the story, but not a big part of the story. Richard Blee is absolutely central to it, because he was high up in the CIA's bin Laden unit, and he was also obviously a hawk. He had been pushing for a program to get the CIA on the ground with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan for months before 9/11 happened, so that it's very striking that on the one hand, he's withholding information that could have stopped 9/11 from happening. That's a general consensus from everybody, that this was vital information. If the FBI had had it, they could have brought in some, maybe the majority of the hijackers. Then on the other hand, he's acting as if he wanted 9/11 to go forward, and at the same time, he's preparing a plan for what to do when there's a casus belli, and it's essentially what they did do. They went in on behalf of the Northern Alliance, which was quite controversial because everyone knew that the Northern Alliance was an army supporting itself by drug trafficking.
Speaking of drug trafficking, now we see Geraldo Rivera on Fox, we see ABC News, we see BBC. I mean, I've played these clips here on air where they just admit now, okay, the troops help grow the opium and we help ship it out and we give them fertilizer, and then we worry about it once it gets to America or once it gets to Europe. And we've seen in the last 10 years, it go from 9% of world production, according to our own Justice Department, to 92% of world opium then produced into heroin coming out of Afghanistan. And now, back when you were exposing it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and Gary Webb was exposing it, they would still somewhat try to deny it. Now they just say, yeah, we grow the opium. It's no big deal. And I was telling you off air, now the El Paso Times, Chicago Tribune have confirmed with the federal documents that indeed most of the big Mexican drug cartels are allowed to ship drugs in, and it's only the cowboys that are shut down, and that our own government shipping guns into Mexico to knock out the drug dealers' competition, and it just looks exactly like Iran-Contra all over again.
Well, for 50 years, the CIA has wanted to exercise its clout in parts of the world where there are no U.S. Army troops, and so they rely on drug proxy armies. And they started this initially in Southeast Asia, the Golden Triangle, back around 1950. And this was written about by Al McCoy in his book, The Politics of Heroin. But what Al didn't really convey is the extent to which CIA support for these armies built up the trade, so that the Golden Triangle went from less than 40 tons a year. It was very minor in the world markets before the war. And then by the height of the Vietnam War, it was somewhere between 600 and 1,200 tons. And then when that shut down, almost immediately you get the Golden Crescent starting up, and lo and behold, the CIA is there too. And again, It's the CIA support for the drug trafficking mujahideen. They weren't all drug traffickers by any means, but most of the CIA support went to the mujahideen who were the drug traffickers. And we see this explosive increase from maybe 100, 200 tons back in 1980 to a high of 8,200 tons in 2006. It's down a little bit, but most of what's being grown in Afghanistan right now, it gets blamed on the Taliban in the U.S. press, but only about 12% of it is Taliban drugs. By far, the bulk of it is in the corrupt system that's headed by Hamid Karzai in Kabul.
Exactly. Even the New York Times admits Karzai's late brother was the main opium kingpin. But there's this Orwellian, absurdist, just beyond ridiculous, where they're sending people to jail for a small amount of narcotics here in this country. And then meanwhile, there's congressional hearings in the late 90s about CIA drug trafficking that your work and others helped expose. Gary Webb, of course. Now they've just got Geraldo.
Tons, yes. You know, when the CIA is involved, it's in the tons. If I could just recall, it was late 90s. It was the DEA discovered that there was a Venezuelan General Guillen Davila. They accused him of importing a ton of cocaine with CIA approval. The Wall Street Journal said it might have been as much as 22 tons. And the man was technically indicted, but it was a sealed indictment. Nothing ever came of it. And we next heard of the man as part of a CIA plot against Hugo Chavez about 4 or 5 years ago, untouched. And the CIA guy who was implicated in that, and the DEA wanted to see him indicted, he was allowed to retire without any penalty whatsoever. This was big-time stuff. This is tons. And as you say, the courts are filled with people dealing with ounces.
Well, I mean, expanding on that with the Sinaloa cartel declaring they work for the CIA, and then sure enough, the government came in and said, yes, this is true, national security. I mean, that just came out last week. And so how do the cops, how do the average people out there who are kicking down doors looking for marijuana, how do they rationalize this when basically it's now an open secret that the majority of narcotics shipped into this country are brought in by CIA-authorized contractors and cartels, and really the only people being busted that are of any large size are cowboys? I mean, there's no doubt that's happening. They've made drugs illegal because prohibition ended of alcohol. They needed a new business. By making it illegal, it increases the price. How long can this phony war on drugs go as we see it destroying our society?
I know they've spent over $1 trillion in this war on drugs, and we've only seen the consumption rates go up. I do think it's very obvious that a first step should be to legalize marijuana, because that would take the profits out of the Mexican cartels. They don't grow cocaine there. They grow marijuana, and if people could grow their own, they would be smoking a healthier commodity than what they get, for which is, hyped up and laced with other drugs and so on. But this is argued for by a lot of medical experts just on medical grounds. But the objection, the reason it's not happening is political, because the high prices of drugs is sustaining a complete